Welcome to the Pulse Wave, brought to you by Metronome, where we build mission-critical tech to help harden our nation's land, sea, and sky, built for Earth, ready for orbit. So this weekend when I was getting prepared for this, I was wondering about how many Americans actually know what's going on in orbit around Earth right now. And I'm not talking about like where the Big Dipper is or one of my favorite constellations, Orion. Nothing like that. Really, how many know that there's a Russian satellite that's most likely an ASAT weapon that's tumbling through low Earth orbit right now? And when I say an ASAT weapon, I mean an anti-satellite system designed to wipe out everything else flying near it. And if it detonates, it could destroy every other satellite in that band, all the GPS, all the comms, surveillance, commercial and military, all gone. And that would make the entire orbital layer unusable for years. So now I'm curious, do you think that more people should know about this? Or do you think it's better that they don't? Because ignorance, as we know, is definitely bliss. And we've got enough stuff to worry about down here as it is. And we've all seen Star Wars, right? But at this point, none of this stuff is sci-fi. It's strategic for every single nation. As I just mentioned, Russia's throwing up anti-satellite weapons, and China just ran a full Earth-based test of its crewed moon lander. And no, they have not landed on moon yet, but that is coming. They want to get there by 2030. And it's not just to prove that they can make it to the moon. They want to perform, and they want to put themselves in a position of power. And in other news, Japan just launched a wooden satellite. And I know that it sounds like a stunt, but it's clean burning, it's lightweight, and though it's experimental, it may be the future. And the United States, USA, our nation, the greatest nation on Earth. Yes, our space program has had some hiccups, but Artemis is rolling. Starliner made orbit, and our private sector with companies that you probably heard of, like SpaceX and Blue Origin and Firefly, are pushing the bounds as venture-backed stalwarts. And so the question is not if space will be a warfighting domain anymore, because we are prepping for it and all the other nations are as well. So here's something to think about. In any scenario, whoever is at the top of the hill has the best vantage point. Looking down, watching for movement, and shooting anything that tries to come up there where they are. That's what's at stake at this point. It's pretty exciting, isn't it? It's also pretty freaking terrifying. And yet, what's crazy, in the middle of all of this, a Russian, 2 Americans, and a Japanese astronaut hopped into a Falcon 9 rocket a couple weeks ago and flew up to the International Space Station together. Just 3 humans in a rocket from adversarial countries getting together 250 miles above Earth. And that's a crazy contradiction in space right now in 2025, because at the same time, it is our most contested high ground and our last shared frontier. So let's get to it. On the show today, she is a NASA International Space Station flight controller and astronaut technical instructor, and is the founder of Higher Orbits. She uses space to engage students in STEM. And most importantly, her outfits are out of this world. Welcome to the show, Michelle Lucas.
Hey, Virgil. Thanks for having me. One quick correction. Former instructor and flight controller. I'm not there currently.
I was going to throw that in there, but I stumbled over that. Welcome.
You're great. I just had to keep myself legal.
Don't bother him when he's on the phone with his favorite AI bot, all right? He's the president and founder of Mount Indy. Welcome back, Tommy Weinert.
Hello. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
Yeah.
All right, well, guys, let's get to it. Segment 1. What is it called? Tumbling nuke? No big deal. So, Russia's anti-satellite nuke could leave lower orbit unusable. Test vehicle may already be deployed. So a U.S. government official has indicated that Russia already has some kind of clandestine testbed in space as part of its development of a nuclear-armed, on-orbit anti-satellite weapon. Our analyses assess that detonation of a nuclear device in a particular placement in orbit of a magnitude and location would render lower Earth orbit unusable for a certain amount of time. The concept that we're concerned about is Russia developing, and if we're unable to convince them, to ultimately fly a nuclear weapon in space. It's an indiscriminate weapon that doesn't have national boundaries. It doesn't determine between military satellites, civilian satellites, or commercial satellites. To me, that's pretty terrifying when I think about that. So before I get to asking you guys a couple of questions, I sat around after I read this and did just a tiny bit more research, and I wondered, like, okay, well, what is that satellite doing now? Because this story was written last year. Let's get to this.
Russia's secret space weapon may have just died in orbit. Russia's military satellite Cosmos 2553, accused of helping Moscow build a nuclear anti-satellite weapon, appears to be spinning out of control in orbit, analysts say. Launched just before Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, Cosmos 2553 parked itself 2,000 kilometers above Earth, deep in dangerous cosmic radiation. Tracking companies Leo Labs and Slingshot Aerospace have watched it tumble erratically for more than a year. In December, Leo Labs confirmed it had high confidence the satellite was no longer functioning. Moscow claims the satellite was simply researching radiation. U.S. officials are not buying it, warning that Cosmos 2553's mission doesn't match its behavior. They suspect it was aiding the development of a nuclear weapon capable of knocking out satellite constellations like SpaceX's Starlink, which Ukraine depends on. Though recent observations suggest the satellite may have stabilized, experts believe the damage is done. For Russia's secret space plans, this could be a very public failure. For more...
So, that's a little more encouraging, hoping that it's failing at this point. So, Michelle, I'm curious just your thoughts in general, but also, so are there protocols for this kind of orbital threat currently for whatever missions are going on that'll be affected by this?
So this is certainly becoming a very hot topic of conversation as things as things just get more heated. This is absolutely something to be concerned about. The last ASAT test in November of 2021 caused us lots of issues, including that the astronauts on board the International Space Station had to shelter in place in their escape vehicle. So the space station always has a way for crew members to come home. Now, when things get a little dicey, we will actually have them hang out there. Think about like with a tornado drill, when if there's a tornado, you go to your basement. Well, if there's a threat to the space station and the integrity of the space station, we send the crew members to what is their lifeboat, which is a SpaceX Dragon and a Russian Soyuz capsule. And anytime there are things that happen like this in low Earth orbit, it's a threat to the humans on board the International Space Station. It's a threat to our GPS satellites. It's a threat to everything that is up there in orbit, because something the size of a eraser on a pencil can destroy a huge satellite. Traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, the tiniest piece of shrapnel, the tiniest piece of debris becomes an issue, whether it is from, we'll go with bad actors and an ASAT test, or just space debris in general. So we absolutely have to be concerned about this. And to the point of the nuclear weapons and things of that nature, it used to be we said that the next war fighting domain was space. And there are some who still say that. And that would be an incorrect statement. We are there. There's no future is going to be. I mean, it may get bigger as far as how extensive that is, but we are absolutely there already. And we are seeing that with things that have happened, like the ASAT tests, satellites that are being launched that we may or may not know exactly what's happening with them, questionable motives. There becomes a question and a concern of, what's the Rubicon? At what point do you cross the Rubicon that it's truly an act of aggression and not just, we're kind of trying to see what happens with this? There's not a solid answer in a lot of ways, in my opinion. It's evolving rapidly and not always with a whole lot of transparency, which the other side of that is, I will also say, well, I think people should be worried. I don't think the world needs to know everything that's going on from a perspective of, we have a lot of national security things. And I don't think that Joe Q public needs to know every element, because there are things that are meant to be secret for a reason. I was down in Florida last week when the X-37 launched, and I was actually appalled at how much coverage there was about this national security asset that's sitting on top of a rocket, and every detail that was out there about that. I'm like, I kind of miss the days where it was a little bit more quiet, because if everybody in the US knows, it means everybody everywhere else can know too.
So in that article, it said something about if we can't convince them otherwise. So I'm curious: do we know that these are up there? Because we're going to get to that in a second, because they're not the only ones that have put something else up there. Do we just hope that they don't do this, or do we take offensive or defensive position to stop them?
That's a tough one, Virgil, right? Because there's also the element of no, 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 thou shalt not. But do you really think that we aren't also preparing? And so it's really hard to say thou shalt not when obviously we are exploring what are the possibilities to protect ourselves and have that high ground. It really truly is the ultimate high ground. I think that there's a lot of conversations that have to be had. I think that it is difficult in these really tense times for people to want to be honest about what's going on as well.
It's great. So this week I did an experiment for myself, and I spoke about this to a bunch of folks, specifically asking them, "Hey, have you heard of this?" And as you could probably imagine, 0 people had heard about it, and some pretty informed people that I would say watch and listen to current events. So I'm curious, Tom, do you think Michelle answered the question, but do you think more people should know or care? And if so, why or why not?
Well, a couple things. One, there's a large portion of the not a large, but there's a portion of the population that still thinks the Earth is flat, right? I mean,
correct.
It's round, right, Michelle?
Yeah, last time I checked. And we check on a daily basis. So yeah, definitely round.
I just want to So,
but the moon is made of cheese, just so you know.
Yes, right. But the point is, like, more information leads to more stuff like that in a weird way. But like, again, my talent hat comes on where I'm like, what a cool way to get the youth excited about working in defense, working in space, like really realizing that this is stuff that we're dealing with, which, I don't think a lot of people do realize. So from a recruiting standpoint, I'm like, yeah, more people need to know about this cool stuff. But, from a practical standpoint, I don't know that. I mean, I'm terrified. I didn't know about much of this either. And I'm just sitting here terrified now. So I'm probably not going to sleep well tonight after your monologue, Virgil. So thanks for that. But yeah.
What friends are for, right?
Yeah, that's a good take, Tom, right? I think if more people understand, if you understand a threat on the ground, then maybe you want to join the Army. If you understand a threat in space, maybe you want to get involved with space. What do you think about that take, Michelle?
I think there's an element of that. I think the fact that we are looking at this from a military perspective, and the Space Force has a challenge of they need to explain to people better what they do. And I actually just had a conversation with a couple of people who are with the Air Force Association, Space Force Association headquarters. And they're like, yeah, one of our 3 pillars is to better educate people about what we do, because the Netflix documentary did them, or not documentary, that was a big slip. The Netflix comedy did them no favors, right? But yes, this is a way for students who are like, hey, maybe I have a desire to serve, and here's a way to parlay it into the military. It can be a recruiting tool. That's an interesting, and we could do another whole podcast on that. The challenges of recruiting for the military in general. There's a lot of issue there, because we're very, the military, especially from the officer corps, is dominated by what we call warrior caste. It's generally somebody who's been part of the military. And so branching out into new populations of people who we might want to get involved. I think there's definitely potential there. It is one of those things that it's all in how you package it.
Can I ask a question about that really quick? So let me know if I'm right in this assumption. So when Space Force was, when it came out, people were poking a lot of fun at it, right? But I always said, like, this isn't new. Like, this is just the different commands that were rolled up under a new command. Okay. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, you're totally correct, Tommy. But the thing is that now that they have their own uniform and their new, and like all the things, people are like, but what? And most people didn't realize that Space Command existed underneath the Air Force and things like that. So making sure they have an identity for Guardians to it'll be easier to recruit guardians if people actually understand. It was one thing to, recruit for the Air Force. People thought they knew what the Air Force did, and then maybe it worked out that they went to Space Command. For people to understand what guardians do will help with that recruiting. And yeah, there are some who want to serve and want to protect the country and maybe want to do it from a space perspective.
Yeah, I didn't know why they didn't lean more into that in the rollout. Like, hey, this is like always been around, But anyway.
That's
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
Segment 2. China's moon lander has entered the chat. So there's another thing I was not going to say surprised, I was really amazed when I watched this. It's pretty cool. I'm going to show a video here. It's obviously China testing out their lunar lander. And the test is cool. What they could achieve by being successful is also pretty frightening. So, China's lunar lander has successfully completed a comprehensive landing and takeoff at the extraterrestrial celestial landing test site in Huai County, marking a significant breakthrough in the country's manned lunar exploration program. The lunar lander is a newly developed extraterrestrial manned descent and ascent vehicle designed for China's first manned lunar exploration mission, with plans to conduct a manned lunar landing before 2030. It's permanently used for transporting astronauts between lunar orbit and the lunar surface, capable of carrying 2 astronauts. It can also carry a lunar rover and scientific payload supporting astronauts' stay. For instance, during launch phase, we need to verify its launch payload. All right, that's good enough. We got the picture here. So, Michelle, when you talk about China getting to the moon first and getting a permanent presence there prior to us, what risk does that pose for not only, the United States, but every other country on Earth?
This is one of those things that, so I grew up in the world of human spaceflight and very little military space until I got out of the NASA world and started doing some other work. And it's very interesting. I have colleagues who are like, wow, you get really passionate about this and we don't understand why. And I'm like, I need you to understand why. And here, let's start with the Chinese have a demand economy. So if they decide they want to do something, they're going to do it. And there's a reason we got to the moon in the 60s like we did, because of Kennedy's, plan for us to beat the Russians. And people will now say, well, but we work with the Russians on the space station now. Why can't we just do that with China? A couple of things. With the Russians, their country was on a downslide from always. And so we wanted to make sure that technology did not fall into someone else's hands. It became a natural collaboration. China's the opposite way. From a technology perspective, they're on the upswing. And they've made it very clear. Xi has made it very clear that they want to rule the world. They want to rule the planet. Having a presence on the moon when we haven't had a human presence since 1972 absolutely it's a slap in the face to the American space program. It's also a massive national security issue. Want to talk about high ground? There you go. There's a high ground that is a stable point that is the closest celestial body to Earth. I am a huge believer that we have got to do everything in our power to beat the Chinese to the moon. But moreover, I'm going to take this in a slightly different bent, Virgil, and I sort of apologize, but I sort of don't. We start talking about the deorbiting of the International Space Station in 2030. And for a lot of reasons, that makes sense, including, look, she's old. We started launching the first pieces in 1998. We've had a constant human presence on board since November 1st of 2000. So there are some technical challenges that we do need to replace her at some point. However, I absolutely do not want to see us give up a constant human presence in space because the Chinese have one now. And we, to go back to segment 1, space is the next, it is not the next, it's a new warfighting domain. And not that a civilian space station is doing that, but there is a security element of when we have a presence that is meaningful. I have a friend, and I won't quote him because it would get him into a whole lot of trouble, who makes the comment of like, the Chinese have landed a lander on the far side of the moon. They're spreading communism all over the place there. It is a space race. It is just one that is not as well known. We have something here in the US called the Wolf Act that prohibits the United States from working with China in space for all these reasons. And it's been there for a long time. It's not new. It's a known quantity that this is a national security issue. And I will say the fact that they landed it, they tested it here on Earth. We've also seen it's a lot harder in space than, it is on Earth. We've had a number of companies work to try and land on the moon, and some have been fully successful, some have been partially successful. But it is reason for us to all get concerned, and it is reason for us to not be cutting budget at NASA and instead be putting more money in.
Who's going to win?
I don't want to answer that question. Let me say it differently. Unless we really, as a nation, decide this is important, they will beat us. We have to decide this is important. We have to invest, and we have to quit moving the target. Because every time you move the target of when are we going to do this, what are we going to do, it pushes everything back. So they have made it clear they're serious and they are focused. If they keep on that mentality and we don't get focused, they will beat us. And I hate that.
So do I. I'm sure you hate it more than me. So back in the 60s? I have so many questions. This is just completely baffling to me. So they're driving VW Beetles, and they made it to the moon and walked on it. And now it's 50 years later, and no one's been back.
With the computing power of a calculator is the analogy that I've heard too,
yeah.
Which is insane to think about.
Yep.
They were also, I was going to talk about this, but also in the 60s, they tested releasing, the nuclear explosion in low Earth orbit. They did that test to see what would happen, and they ended up actually blowing up a couple satellites. Like, how did they have that technology in the 1960s? And it's not just the USA, right now that's trying to get there. Every nation's trying to get there. What is the word of it? It's unbelievable that those men and women did it, for one. And it's, I guess, also unbelievable. How come all these people with all this money and AI and all can't jump on a rocket tomorrow and get there? It boggles my mind. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's a combination of things. It's a combination of we've lost all of that knowledge. Papers exist and whatnot, but all the people who did that, they're long gone. We have a lot more bureaucracy now than we used to, and we have a lot less budget than we used to. People look at the budget for things like this and think it's large, and it's actually very small, and it's much smaller than the budget we had in the 1960s and the moon race. So from a moon perspective in particular, that is the crux of the challenge there. And the fact that the requirements keep changing. If you just, let's compare it to building a house. If you go to a builder and you want to build a house and here are all the requirements, like, sure, that'll be done in a year. But then you're like, oh, no, 2 months in, I'm just kidding. I really wanted it to have these 47 extra things. Okay, well, it's no longer a year. Now it's longer. Go on along another couple of months and do a massive change of, I want it to be 2 stories instead of 1. Those kinds of changes make it very difficult as well. And that is what happens with the political cycle that happens for a major program like a moon landing. It keeps changing. And space is hard. That sounds so trite, but it's not easy. We had tons of failures in the 60s in the drive to do all of this. We are seeing some failures now. You just didn't see all the failures that happened in the 60s leading up to it. We had one that resulted in the loss of crew life with Apollo 1. But we had a lot of other failures that were, whether they were tests or things of that nature. Apollo 13, we got them home, but it technically was a failure, right? Like, the vehicle didn't work like it was supposed to. The crew didn't land on the moon. Everything, now we see the failures more. And then the budget element. When it comes to the the warfare stuff in space, the Reagan era of Star Wars, and there are still space shuttle missions that are classified that you can't go find out what their payloads were, which is really fascinating to me. I've been at some of those like reunion dinners and they're like, oh, you know that thing we did, but that we can't talk about and we can't tell you about. And I'm like, that's just rude. Like, I want
Ah,
Tell me.
I know. I'm like, please, please, please. You know, we have more technology now. I think we're also smarter now than we used to be from a perspective of being more careful about the things that we do with those kinds of technologies. Understanding A, the implications it has to low Earth orbit, B, the implications it has to our global, I don't want to say peace because we're certainly not at peace on this planet, but that we're not doing something that triggers a reaction that can be considered an act of aggression or an act of war. So I think we're a little bit smarter about that than we used to be in some ways. And that's perhaps why you're not necessarily seeing as much, but it also doesn't mean as much isn't happening because, you know, maybe somebody's keeping their mouth shut, which would be unusual.
Tom, do you think that so, you know, we're talking about how China moves at a light speed with, well, they're communist and they don't have to tell their people or vote and they move forward. So, and then Michelle's just talking about fits and starts. You also didn't mention when the next PM gets moved into the program and they decide to do different too. And it goes on and on. Do you think there's a middle ground, Tom, between our capitalistic society and who we are as a nation and China being communist and the pace with which they can move and, you know, the fact that we slog along a lot of times as a country? What do you think there?
I don't know if this answers that, but, you know, to Michelle's point about the public's perception of the importance of this and how that ties into voting and then ultimately where dollars get spent, I've heard this take, which I really like the United States has not had an invasion. I might get the numbers wrong, but since the War of 1812, where the British came over, we have lived a life of not understanding this threat of warfare. I was at a meeting the other day, and someone from the Navy pointed out there's over 120 armed conflicts currently taking place across the globe. 120. I would have never guessed that. So we have this privilege in this country of being strategically located and kind of geographically, you know, safe. And we haven't, we think that some people think that, like, hey, if the military wasn't there, we wouldn't have wars, which is like saying if the fire department wasn't there, we wouldn't have fires. And so getting people behind, let's spend money and invest in this, where we as a country have not, you know, suffered from warfare on, you know, on our shores. I think there's a lot to do with that. We have this privilege of safety and this privilege of thinking that, like, it couldn't happen to us, or, you know what I mean? So, like, when you're not faced with the constant threat, it's very hard, especially this day and age when people are, you know, losing jobs and, you know, suffering to some extent. It's very hard to say, let's dump all this money into the space program. So I do understand that. So is there a middle ground between China and the U.S.? I mean, I would think that they probably fear, because of their regime, a lot more the threat of annihilation because of the propaganda that exists there. So, but I think that we as U.S. citizens need to have a little bit more understanding of part of the reason we've been so safe is because of this investment that we've made in our military and our defense. And whether or not you like that, it's absolutely 100% true. And so there needs to be an informed discussion around what does it mean if somebody has a strategic presence at the highest ground possible looking down upon us? What does that mean? You know, to the common person, I mean, you know, you have to talk about things like, look, I'll say this one last thing. In San Diego one time, the power went out for 26 hours or something. And it was like Lord of the Flies. It was like in my neighborhood, like, oh my God, people are like starting to freak out. And this was one day. So like, if you think of things like that, like infrastructure going down, like you can't use your credit card, you know, you can't turn your lights on, like that, that's the stuff that we're talking about here that could really Like, I think that's the biggest threat, is just wiping out infrastructure. Then there's really no defense from that. But we don't feel that, think that, never experienced it. And in a sense, that's an incredible privilege that we've been afforded as a nation.
That's a great point. The last time you could say we had the Twin Towers attacked, and that was the most motivated our country's been to protect ourselves and come together as one. So that's a really great take. And it goes to current times where the European Union, and not only, being pressured to maybe spend a little more on defense, they themselves are saying we need to spend more on defense. We've got this threat right now knocking on our front door. Right now they do. So that is an excellent point. And hopefully it doesn't have to come to that in order for us to really put the right foot forward. What I would say is encouraging is I hear, Sean Duffy talking. He does talk a little bit about this, and he brings up the moon and he brings up the race, but that's only if you're really listening to that. And if you happen to watch the one show that he was on and when he was talking, or if you care to listen to him. So some of that's getting out there. It does make sense, because it's not, like you said, Michelle, it's not the future anymore. It's happening right now, and we've got enough piled into defense. Let's push a little more chips into that direction. Well, Segment 3.
Can I add one more comment?
Oh, dude, go ahead. We'll cut that part out in post.
I'm sorry. And one additional comment to that. One of the challenges is, for good or for bad, and I think it largely was for good, we made spaceflight about being a civilian space agency. And this is, for the good of humanity and all of these things, right? It's about exploration. It's about science and all those things. Albeit, like I said, there are still classified space shuttle missions that happened a long time ago. We don't do those anymore. And so there are a lot of people who it's unpalatable to them, the idea that there's crossover. But the reality is that there has to be, right? There is, space seems very large, but there are very few ways to get there. And so we are using civilian assets to get to our humans to space. That would be the same civilian assets we would use to get humans to space if it were for military purposes. So we've now gotten to the point where there has to be crossover. And to be honest, my friends that live only in the civil space world, they're like, I don't like these comments, Michelle. I'm like, I get it, but none of us live in a vacuum. And so there is interconnectivity.
Oh, that's interesting. So NASA sort of being more of, like you said, like that sort of civil going to space and exploring, as opposed to, yes, right. I mean, the roads are used to drive to work, as well as for police officers to take care of their mission. Yep. Excellent point. Segment 3, built like a birch. So Japan launched the first wooden satellite into space, and this reminded me of you, Michelle, while I was reading the story. This is actually why I did this. I'll tell you why. Japan's wooden satellite went up into space aboard an unmanned SpaceX rocket to test timber for space exploration. Satellite is named lignosat after the Latin word for wood. Magnolia tree it was also used by samurai warriors for their sword sheaths. Is key to environmentally friendly satellites at this point. Spacewood project was headed by Koji Murata, and he said that the obvious choice for space structures was that wood. When you use wood on Earth, you have the problems of burning, rotting, and deformation. In space, you don't have those problems. There's no oxygen, so it doesn't burn. There's no living creatures in them, so they don't rot. We chose materials that could withstand as much detailed work as possible because of the small size of the satellites. That's why they chose magnolia, because they could do the details in there. It's unlikely to split or break and allows electromagnetic waves to pass through them. That's interesting. It's lighter, stronger structural materials that are less likely to generate debris, as you were talking about earlier, Michelle. Conversation news website said, we've left roughly 23,000 objects larger than 4 inches and 100 million pieces of debris larger than 0.4 inches or 1 millimeter. These minuscule bits of debris could accelerate to 24,000 kilometers an hour, 10 times faster than a bullet. Consequently, a paint fleck could tear spacesuits and destroy astronaut equipment. That's fascinating. I didn't know about that in terms of the space debris. But the reason I thought about you with this is because your work with higher orbits, how you work with kids and they build these really neat they come up with these great projects to spend into space to test them. And I thought, man, this seems like something some kid would think of. So, Michelle, how important are projects like this? And is this like the future of low Earth orbit?
So I think it's fascinating. And I love when people start thinking outside of the box of what can we do that's different, that is maybe more environmentally friendly. I have some debates about that, if it's really necessarily any better in low Earth orbit than a big metal hunk of satellite. And I'm not smart enough to know all the challenges that come with wood, as far as the building of the satellites that get really complex. You can do a lot of things if we're talking on the easy side of things. You start getting more complex. I have a lot more questions. I think it's fascinating, and I love that they did it. It's interesting that they make the comment of a paint fleck can tear through a spacesuit. It can, because it's 17,500 miles an hour, but so can a splinter from a piece of wood. So it becomes a yes, but no. With wood, you're going to have different elements of challenges. Yeah, maybe you don't have as many bolts and nuts. I then question, how does everything get held together? Because at some point, it all has to hold together. So I think it's a lovely idea. I love reaching into new realms of possibility for creating things. I don't think it's the long-term answer by any means, but I think that it's always worth investigating something possibly new like that. And yeah, it is totally something a student would be like, well, but what if we do this instead? Yeah, I love it.
It's funny, because I read here, I was like, what about splinters? Splinters suck on Earth. Imagine getting one in space that was going 14,000 miles an hour.
Yeah.
You get the splinter out. Tom, are you excited that there's recyclable material floating in space now?
I mean, I couldn't care less about that, to be honest. I mean, it just scares me that there's that much stuff floating around up there. But no, I don't care. But I think they missed a huge opportunity to name that thing Samurai. I mean, it was made out of samurai wood. What are they doing? They got to work on their branding.
So that was like my next question too, Michelle, is the amount of things that are actually up there in lower Earth orbit, how things are dodging them, I guess you could say, and that sort of leads into this story. We'll throw this up here and then we'll talk about that a little bit more. So segment 4, don't worry, it only hit Kenya. Space object smashes into remote Kenyan village, leading to investigation. A huge red-hot object fell from the sky into a Kenyan village. It was a fragment of a space object. It was 2.5 meters wide, there it is, and it weighed 1,000 pounds. A piece of metal fell from space onto Earth. The agency wishes to clarify the object, a metal ring measuring, again, 2.5 meters. It is a space object. Here you go. This is the best part. The fallen object is likely an isolated case and is still under investigation. So, hey, don't worry, it's not going to happen again. Don't worry, even though it never was supposed to happen to begin with. Tom, how do you think that this story would have changed if that fell into my backyard in Charleston?
Oh, yeah.
More people would know about it?
It would be a way different story. But my question is, and I don't know anything about space, but like when they say fell from space, like, are we talking about like low Earth, or because everything you see in the movies is like, oh, it's going to burn up in re-entry or whatever. So what do they mean it fell from space? Like, what does that mean?
So, and it's interesting. You say, would it be different? It happened to you in South Carolina. It happened not far from you about a year ago. A piece of Dragon's trunk hit a cabin in North Carolina. Yes, in theory, things should all burn up when they come back through the atmosphere. It is a question of the angle that they come in, how they're oriented, things of that nature. The bigger it is, the harder it is for it to burn up. So, for example, when you start thinking really big with the International Space Station, one of the challenges is to figure out, how do we bring that all back so that it actually burns up and doesn't land on your house, your car, anything like that. They are coming out of low Earth orbit and in different places from that perspective. Sometimes it's satellites. And things come out of orbit all the time. You're supposed to now, I say now because it wasn't always the case, have a plan for how to deorbit your spacecraft or put it into what we call a graveyard orbit, meaning it's an area where there's a bunch of junk, just stays there. It's not in the way of anybody else's satellites and all that good stuff. From a deorbit perspective, most of the time, admittedly, most of the time it works. Like it deorbits, it burns up, all is fine. Maybe some little ash falls, typically into the ocean and whatnot. Environmentalists have a fit about that. Right. That's a different conversation. But yes, it is happening more and more often that pieces are coming back intact, like in Kenya and in North Carolina. And a part of it is we are simply flying way more stuff in space than we ever have in all of history. We are launching more rockets. We have more satellites. And it's, I guess, to go to, an analogy that was used before about cars or something like that there were a lot less accidents in 1920 with cars than there are in 2025 with cars, just based on the fact that there's a lot more cars. And so the same thing with space debris and satellites. There's just a lot more stuff in space now.
Can I ask an uneducated question, which most
Please.
of mine are? So is the space station in low Earth orbit, or is it, where's the space station?
So the space station's in low Earth orbit, and its exact orbit depends on a variety of things, including how most recently it's been boosted. It's a large object in orbit, and so gravity does pull it down. And so we have to do reboosts. And so its exact orbit varies, but it's about 250, some odd miles up, straight up. And so it is in low Earth orbit.
Okay.
The vast majority of satellites that we think about tend to be in LEO, low Earth orbit. There are a large number there. There are a bunch in MEO, which is medium Earth orbit, and GEO. So we have geosynchronous, geostationary. But a lot of what we're seeing right now with these launches that are happening all the time, the satellites are in low Earth orbit.
So when you're in when something's in low Earth orbit, that is a very hard tongue twister, by the way.
Yeah. Leo's easier.
I thought they were just stuck there. So will every single thing in a low Earth orbit eventually fall on my house?
Yeah. Well, so everything that's in Leo without a reboost will eventually come back to Earth, because there is a gravitational pull from Earth that even while you're orbiting, your orbit is decaying. A lot of satellites have thrusters that will help boost them, keep them in whatever proper orbit they need. We now have some things called mission extension vehicles, MEVs, where we can send another satellite to go over, grab a satellite and move it to another orbit, or give it gas, if you will, like if its thrusters are out of gas. Yeah, it is kind of like a tow truck. And then there are those that there's the expectation, okay, it's outlived its lifespan. And they have it in such a way that the orbit will degrade to the point that it will come back into the atmosphere and break apart peacefully without falling on your house.
So it is a fact that objects are going to keep falling out of the sky and possibly fall on top of somebody or somebody's house or something.
Yes, things are going to keep falling out of the sky. A lot of times, shooting stars you see actually aren't necessarily even meteorites. Sometimes they're space debris. The hope is that they're not going to fall on your houses. And if people are truly doing their due diligence, this shouldn't happen as much. There's a great space environmentalist who is one of my heroes, Mariba Jaw, who is really he is really passionate about this. And one of the challenges from the past is that we don't have any, I'm going to use the word legislation, because there's there's no rules, if you will, of you have to do this or else there's this fine, or there's everything that's out there has no teeth. It's like, thou shalt do this, but if you don't, we're going to go bad. And especially if you're a bad actor, who cares? They're like, I don't give a shit what you're, what's your shame on you. There are, my number is not exact, so give me some grace here. There are about 9,000 Starlink satellites in orbit alone. And the intention is for their constellation to be upwards of 12 to 15 and possibly as many as 40,000, depending on how they evolve all of that. They're not the only one. There's the OneWeb has satellites that are a similar communication network, and Amazon Kuiper is also creating a network that is same construct. that will have, I want to say, around 9,000 satellites. Guys, it used to be for, decades, we didn't have a total of 8,000 satellites. But the other side of it is, it used to also be we couldn't launch like we do.
Mhm.
One of the coolest things for me, and I literally was in tears about this, used to be we have a couple of launches, like a year, like 10 a year. And I'm not just talking human launches, I'm talking, satellite launches. Okay, so maybe a couple dozen. I was in Florida in June, and I watched 4 launches in Florida alone in less than 3 days. And then there was one in Vandenberg as well. We are going to space much more often than we used to. And you don't go to space just to go to space. You go to space to take things to space. And then those things have to go somewhere when they have outlived their life.
Yeah, my 3-year-old is obsessed with rockets right now, and just searching on YouTube rocket launch, I was like surprised at how many there were. I'm like, oh my God, they're like going up all the time.
Yeah. SpaceX has launched, again, I'm close. I may not be exact. If not counting their Starship, their actual launches to orbit, they're at like 103, 104, something like that. Them alone, it's really amazing. And
Yeah.
I was the person who used to like get up for every launch. It didn't matter what time it was. Now I'm like, yeah, okay, I can't get up for every launch anymore.
Yeah.
If there are humans on it, yes, absolutely. If it's a huge payload, yes. If it's Starlink, probably not, because there's one going up every 3rd or 4th day. And it's a credit to the revolutionary things that have been done with the Falcon 9 rocket and this construct of this satellite constellation.
Yeah.
What I love when I'm down at Patrick, we're lucky enough to do some work down at our Space Force. And almost every time I'm there, sort of saying what you're saying, is there's a rocket that's taken off. And I love the passion. Everybody, doesn't matter what meeting's going on or who's talking, everybody gets up and runs outside and watches the rocket. And we are so proud of the velocity, of the safety, the fact that they make it off the launch pad and get up there and what they're trying to accomplish. Michelle, thank you for coming on. This was fascinating to get your take on these little stories that we read and think about and do a little research on, but hearing it from somebody who lives and breathes it really made a difference and was really cool. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And Tom, it's always good to have you. You're such a great guy, brother.
Yeah.
And everybody else, for all the tens of people that watch this, keep open. See you later.